Okay, hello everyone. Let's get a comfortable distance from the microphone. Thank you for coming to the Just the Facts Chicago Alternative Comics Expo presentation of some research that I've been doing for the last decade on how gender and the comics industry intersect or don't. And I'll give a brief introduction to the project, and then I will introduce our panelists, and then we'll sort of go over some information, then we'll have a really loose conversation, and I do actually encourage you to jump in and interrupt each other and steal the mic and ask each other questions as much as you're interested. Because we have some amazing people, and I'll really quickly point out that MariNaomi is actually sitting under her book, which is called Kiss and Tell and came out in 2011 from Harper Perennial. Sara Drake has been doing some really interesting work, a lot of it self-published, a lot of it published in very smaller venues. She likes short walks on the beach, geodesic domes, and hates jerks. And Nicole Boyette is a comics artist, just graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, works both in Seattle and in Chicago, and she's a frequent collaborator and one of the primary researchers on the LadyDrawers project, including Hand Job, our most recent anthology. So this project started about 10 years ago. I noticed that there was this weird stuff going on in the comics industry. Julie Doucet was up and leaving the industry despite being at the peak of her career. A cartoonist pal had been sort of attacked online so vociferously, not for her comics work, but for her gender, that she actually decided to leave the industry permanently. I was getting photographed at conventions, not because I was running the comics journal at the time, but because I was female and people wanted to prove that women enjoyed comics. And men in the industry would say to me, well, gender has nothing to do with how the industry works. And yet I was constantly mistaken for a girlfriend or a wife or an assistant bookstore owner. And later I experienced much sort of worse problems around gender in the comics industry. So I started to get interested not so much in women cartoonists, but in how gender plays out in this particular form of media. And this one had seemed to become so thoroughly gendered that no one noticed anymore that it had created this sort of masculine environment. So I got really interested in how that worked. And I use a media justice approach, which basically argues that in a democracy, all people, educated or not, no matter how they are sexed or gendered or raced, have a right, both a right and possibly an obligation to participate in media making as an ongoing way of making sure that our participatory democracy actually works. But I was also reading for the Best American Comic Series, which is a series that I started for Houghton Mifflin at the time. So I read between 2004 and 2008 every single comic published, every single one. Every one. And that's a lot of comics, and what I started to realize was that they were getting very stagnant, and there was not enough diversity of creators coming in to actually shift up storylines, so that the comics that I was reading in 2004 were very similar to the ones I was reading in 2008. So I started collecting data, mostly survey, like very mathematical, scientific data. Surveys, comics counts, sales figures, etc. And teaching a class at the School of the Art Institute, and then doing a column at a news site called TruthOut that is an experiment in comics journalism, also called LadyDrawers. And our panelists have all participated in different aspects of this project, but have also been involved in the industry in different ways for the last varying number of years. MariNaomi has been self-publishing, in fact, for 15 years. Sara's been self-publishing for maybe 5? Graduated recently from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago as well. And Nicole, how long would you say you've been involved?
2 years, maybe?
2 years. And I guess one of the first things that we discovered, and Nicole actually helped do this research, was we did counts on creators that were published in different aspects of the comics industry. And across the board, it's around 11% women being published in the industry, and which means that it's about 89% men being published in the industry. And in my world, which is the underground punk rock, punk planet world, it would seem that corporate comics would probably be much worse than my independent realm. But in fact, when we counted, we realized that the corporate world published more women, 12%, than the independent world, which published only, on average, 10%. And so I wanted to ask the panelists whether or not they sort of felt that it mattered who was creating the work that they were reading, in comics in particular.
Somebody else want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to answer because I can.
Right now.
So if I'm reading a comic, do I care if it's a woman or a man? Is that the question?
Do you care who it is?
Or who it is? Well, it depends. I mean, I feel across the board like it shouldn't matter, but sometimes it does. Like I was just actually talking about this last night with someone, how I really liked CeeLo Green until I found out what a homophobic asshole he was. So in that case, if I find out someone's a jerk, and that, you know, who probably would want to strip me of any kind of rights I have, then that does matter. But as far as gender, race, or whatever, I don't care about that. But, so yeah, jerks, bad.
As someone who has done curatorial projects and publishing projects and organizing projects, I spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff, so I feel like through doing that I really do give a shit about it. I really hate jerks too. But I also think it's important to look at jerks' work, to know that they exist and sort of how they talk about issues. And notice when a lot more jerks are probably publishing than maybe non-jerks. But what I think, I really like specific kinds of media that address representational theory or are trying to talk about experience in a specific way. And I mean, I think it's really important, like really, really important. And I have anecdotes that make sense to this. So I work at the Cambodian Association of Illinois, and I teach on Fridays. I work with mostly Cambodian American teen girls. And we go to a lot of publishing events together, and we've done comic events together, and the conversation is always, they want to experiences and people who are publishing who really like talk to them or speak to them, and they're always like, why can't I find like any sort of Asian American anyone in this world? And like beginning there to sort of wonder why not is really important. I don't know, I want teens to have people to read.
Actually, now that you say that, even though I'm not going to not read someone because they're a race or gender or whatever, I do get really excited if I see Hapa girls doing comics. That's all.
Yeah, you can keep it.
Yeah. I think people who aren't your stereotypical white comics bro have to think about things like who they're actually drawing in ways that that guy doesn't. They might, you know, because they are a woman or because they are a person of color, might be depicting those characters more honestly and more often because they don't assume that they're the standard. And that kind of variety and diversity is something that I really want to see. I had to read, I think, everything Vertigo put out for almost a year when we were doing research, and the one comic that wasn't full of rape and weirdness was by Sara Glidden. So in my experience, I mean, within that narrow one chunk of reading, like, I really appreciated having a woman who had creative control of her work. That meant a lot.
Is this the earnings potential?
This is gender of people who responded to the survey.
Do we have the earnings potential one in here?
That's fine.
Oh, this is not. Okay. So, Actually, before that, we'd done a survey of all the women comics creators that I knew, the sort of 2004 to 2007 women comics creators list that I had come up with, which is, at that point, probably fit on two sheets of paper. And I did sort of send out an email to them, and I asked them for a very personal survey, asking them how much money they earned, and also how long they'd been working in the field. And what we basically discovered was that for women working in comics, no matter how long you stay in the field, even people who had been working for over 25 years, as well as people who'd been working for under 5 years, of that whole range of people who'd been working for 25 years was the highest number that we asked, only 10% of them ended up working for above minimum wage, receiving more than minimum wage for their comics. And so I just wanted to sort of put out a quick question about economic earnings and what you guys have gotten out of your comics as long as you've been working in the field. You are welcome to not be very specific about the question. You're welcome to just give us a broad strokes idea. But how does this fit into your experience?
What is minimum wage?
It depends if it's hourly. It depends on where it is. I think in California, you're closer to like $10 an hour.
Yeah, that'd be really hard to make minimum wage on comics. They just take so damn long to do. $7.25? What does that come out to per year?
It's between 7,000 and 12,000 nationally per year.
7,000 and 12,000 nationally per year. Okay. So yeah, I've been doing comics for a long time, for 15 years, self-publishing, but I don't think I made any money the first 10 years. I mean, I think it was all a loss just because it costs a lot to print them out and you can't really charge a lot for them. But I mean, it's a labor of love, and that's what day jobs are for. The last couple of years I've done pretty well. Once I got a publishing deal, that helped. But still not minimum wage, I don't think. Maybe around there.
Can you speak a little bit more specifically about why a publishing deal would have changed the economic infrastructure of your career?
Well, it costs a lot more to self-publish. I mean, just going down to and especially when you live in a tiny San Francisco apartment and don't have a lot of space to buy 1,000 comics at the bulk rate or whatever. I did that once, and I ended up throwing most of it away, actually, which was really sad. But it was just too much. There's too many things, and I need closet space, for things. Yeah, so just having an advance, it really helps. I don't know how to answer that question. But yeah, just not having to do all that stuff. Although, I think this is kind of a tangent, but a lot of people think that once you have a publishing deal, all the hard stuff goes away, but it actually gets a lot harder in some ways for promotions and stuff. But I digress. What about you?
So as a recent graduate, I knew I wouldn't make any money in self-publishing and started working full-time. The only thing I've done that I've actually made a significant amount of money on would be doing a TruthOut column for LadyDrawers, which was $100 a strip, which is a lot for comics work. Usually do a lot of work for free, or you submit to anthologies who sort of get to benefit from your work and not you, really. And you're in contexts you may not be comfortable with. So what the LadyDrawers TruthOut column does is it sort of creates, while minimal, an economy for artists, women artists, in a specific way. That doesn't really exist. But I don't make money on my comics at all. And I work in color, so printing is really expensive to self-publish. I'm always broke.
Can I just add to that? I don't really do anthologies for no money anymore because Like there's just no time for it. And I feel like maybe for friends or for a good cause, I'll do it for kind of cheap. But like I just feel like it's really important for artists to charge for their work, like really important. And if we all stop doing free work, then people won't expect it anymore. But, you know, I think once that actually what you asked before, the economy of having a publishing deal, I think just by having that book out and having like some like that being some sort of credibility, it made me a little bolder and able to say no, and made people take me a little more seriously, so that, you know, like people kind of expect to have to pay me now for some weird reason, but like, and it's like, oh yeah, I shouldn't, you know. I think just the fact that the book's out there and that more people know who I am, like more people ask me for things, so it's easier to turn things down nowadays. Sometimes it pains me too if it's someone that I like or like a cause that I like, but really, like, kind of have to, you should charge for your work. That's what I'm saying.
I just graduated and today made $15, so not a lot of money. Most of it's just like working and then taking time to make stuff with people that I really enjoy collaborating with. But I've just started, and in an ideal world, we'd be able to charge, right? But there's not that many opportunities. When we were looking at who gets employed in the comics industry, especially in mainstream comics, like the only place they were hiring women was as colorists, which is ridiculous. Like literally the only. There were, I think in the New 52, like there was one editor and one artist who had creative control of their work, and that was it. And Janelle Aslan no longer works for them, and they moved the artist to another project where she was partnered with a man. So I'm not super hopeful.
Sara alluded to this earlier, but part of the LadyDrawers project is essentially convincing a progressive news organization that paying, particularly in this case, female cartoonists, women cartoonists, to make comics for a journalism site is economic infrastructure that I hope to continue off into the future. And it basically pays, $100 for a strip, which is actually, I mean, it may be a lot for you, but it's not market rate. And but it's something, and it's a way of talking about building other things in the future. So when you pitch your comics journalism project about gender to your news organization, LadyDrawers works. We get thousands of hits every month. The other thing that that when we start to show these numbers, people start asking immediately is, maybe there are just not very many women who want to make comics. And I think that here at Cake, it becomes really obvious that actually there are both women and sort of non-traditionally gendered people, trans people, and genderqueer people who do want to make comics. And so, of course, we asked people in the comics industry, in all areas of the comics industry, just this recent year in 2012. About 120 respondents, 54% male, 39% female, 2% transgender, 3% genderqueer, and 2% sort of other. And this pretty closely matched my experience reading for the Best American Comics. So reading every comic between 2004 and 2008, it became really obvious to me that the industry didn't look like this. The industry looked to be about 40% women cartoonists and maybe a little bit more than 50% male cartoonists. And so the question that gets asked, I would also like to turn to the panel. The way the question gets posed is usually, do girls even want to make comics? But I think the question that I'd be interested in hearing from you on is, what draws you to make comics in the first place?
You go first this time.
Okay. I was sort of charmed in the first place by how limitless it was. I got the medium and was like, I can do anything I want to do. that's, and I like working in books. I like it. I don't know.
I've always been a storyteller before I was an artist. I wrote a couple probably really bad novels when I was younger. I was more of a novel writer, and then I think it was like the early 90s, I started reading some things. Scott Russo's Jizz comics really appealed to me. Mary Fleener's Slutburger, Roberta Gregory, Naughty Bits. Like I found these things, and I'm like, holy shit, these are so, like, what an interesting art form. I'd never seen anything beyond, like, Garfield or something. I guess Bloom County, I like Bloom County. And so I got really addicted to those, and then I think between Mary Fleener and Joe Matt, like, I was like, oh, like, there really wasn't a memoir genre beyond, like, celebrity memoirs, but, like, so this was my first exposure to it, and it just, like, it was so appealing, and I always felt like I had just these crazy stories to tell, like, because I had, kind of a crazy childhood and, or teenage, so I'd always tell these stories, and I'm like, God, I should really make comics about them, and so, I don't know, it's just, I'm motivated by wanting to tell these stories that are, but I think so visually sometimes, and now I can't even write fiction anymore because, like, I just want to insert panels. So I'm like, well, yeah, like my brain is like reconfigured to only make comics from now on. I hope I never want to be a fiction writer again. But yeah, I just love it so much.
I really like reading them, and I really like making them, and I grew up reading tons and tons of comics and web comics, and it was my favorite way to tell stories. Like, they have bodies in them in a way that books by themselves really don't.
That was great. Thank you, guys. So then the next question when we start looking at who does and does not get published is that maybe women aren't actually submitting comics to publishers. And so we asked people, are you submitting comics to publishers? And 54% of the comics survey respondents that we spoke to said that they were submitting comics to publishers. And 47% said no. Presumably, they're perfectly happy publishing their comics either on the web or self-publishing in print. And actually, we also found that even most web comics, people are still making comics in print, which was kind of exciting and fascinating for geeks like me who are totally dedicated to print. And then of that, the respondents who indicated that they had been published by a person or a company or organization that was not operated by themselves, so published by someone else, 61% had said yes, and 39% said no. Which only really gets interesting when we start to break this down by gender. Have you ever sought out a publisher? 56% of the men we spoke to said yes, and 44% said no. Have you ever been published by someone other than yourself? 75% said yes, and no was indicated by 25% of the respondents, meaning that approximately 20% of the male respondents had been sought out by publishers, hadn't bothered submitting work, but had actually been approached by publishers themselves. Women we spoke to, have you ever sought out a publisher? 55% said yes, the exact same number. Well, 1% more women are approaching publishers than men. 45% said no. But have you ever been published by someone other than yourself? 54% women said yes. 46% said no. And it's important to notice that what the distinction here is. That not only are a certain volume of women approaching publishers and not being published by them, but that men are being sought out by publishers and then also being published by them. Of course, also, we did not only speak to traditionally gendered men and women, we also spoke to genderqueers, non-binary gender people, and trans people. Have you ever sought out a publisher? 63% said flat out no. 37% said yes. Same exact numbers. Have you ever been published by someone other than yourself? 37% said yes. 63% said no. And I guess I'd like to ask the panel more specifically questions, and this gets a little bit insider. Hopefully we're all comfortable with insider comics knowledge here. What your experience is in submitting to comics publishers, and in MariNaomi's case, especially more traditional publishers.
The second that I started drawing comics, I thought I was like, I want Fantagraphics to publish me. They have to this day not ever responded to an email from me. But
that's not true.
They haven't?
When I worked there, I responded to an email.
You responded to my email? I don't think I ever got that.
I put you on the cover of the women's comics issue edited by Mary Fleener.
I never got anything from you. Ms. Fleener came up to me at a convention and asked me if I'd do it.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know you had anything to do with that.
Indeed I did.
Aww.
See, we got back to you.
Look at
but
that.
Then I don't work there anymore. Sorry.
Well, I
Sorry
never
about the
got
book deal.
Email, but no, all I knew was Mary Fleener, who I had approached the year prior, I think at Comic-Con, and like been a very embarrassing, gushing fangirl to came up to me and totally made my millennium by saying, "Hey, do you want to do something?" And all I heard was, "Do you wanna?" And then I'm like, like endorphins. Thank you. But yeah, the very first thing I thought was I wanted to be published by someone, and I wanted my own jizz. Like I thought that would be great. God, that sounds wrong. But the first person I went to Slave Labor Graphics, which was in San Jose, and I'm based in San Francisco, so we're kind of close to each other. And I said, "Who can publish my comics?" And I was just like, I just made my first comic. Who could publish it? And they actually sent me to Action Girl Comics, and they were the first people I asked, and they said yes, and that was like instant. So I had a really good experience, but that was run by a woman, Sara Dyer, and over the years I'd kind of sent stuff like emails to people like Fantagraphics and other people, but maybe I wasn't pitching right. I don't know, but I didn't get a lot of responses. When I finally, but then again, I didn't really have a book to pitch. I just kind of had, I want to do these comics. So it wasn't really a cohesive idea. And I feel like as soon as I had a good idea of what I wanted to do, things went a lot smoother. Because then I'm like, okay, well, I'm ready to get out of self-publishing because I'm ready for an editor, because I loved self-publishing because it was so free and I didn't have to answer to anyone. But suddenly I'm like, okay, I think a good idea, and I think I have the good start for a book, but I kind of want help to make it perfect because you're writing about your life, so it's weird, like not like, is this interesting to other people kind of questions. And that's when I sought out an agent, and voila, overnight, 2 years later, I had a publishing deal. So.
I have been really proactively submitting comics material to an assortment of publishers, anywhere from Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly to smaller presses locally and nationally, and never get responses back for the past 2 years, not even rejections, which really sucks. Mostly when I do get published for submissions, it's for anthologies or compilations. And that's usually where that happens.
I'm just starting. I feel like I only have I'm brand new answers to all of these questions. But mostly, I think the only things I've put out really are through LadyDrawers and the anthologies we've been putting together, and then little staple booklets that you make for stuff like Zine Fest. That's pretty much it.
But you've also looked at the data for some.
Yeah, I have. Pretty much what we've been talking about, that there's equal numbers of submissions and a giant gap in who actually gets published.
Can I just add another thing? It is interesting how, sometimes when you send email, it just seems to go into the ether and not getting a response. I'd really, really rather get a rejection, even if they don't say why. Just it's so much better to be acknowledged as a human being that you're out there. But something weird started happening after my book came out, which is these publishers who never responded to me sent me emails asking for things. Or not just publishers, but just people who had been, I thought were ignoring me, were approaching me, and it was weird. And so I don't know if like, okay, they just saw my email, didn't know who I was, and then threw it away, or if it got lost into the email ether, which I know happens sometimes. Like I had a whole disagreement with an old friend one time where we thought we were ignoring each other, but we weren't getting each other's emails over like 10 years. So like I know this stuff happens sometimes. Like I'm always questioning like, oh, is it me? Or is it email? Like recently, I'm not gonna say who, but like someone I'd been pursuing and sending emails to, like, because I wanted to be a part of their project. Like they never got back to me, and I sent them a tweet on Twitter, and they got right back to me, and then they saw my email that I'd sent them like 2 years ago, and they responded and said, "Holy shit, you sent this 2 years ago." Like, so I'm like, oh yeah, I did. I don't know. See, I just never know what is behind everything. Like, it's, you know, so I see these statistics and I'm like, holy shit, this is horrible, and maybe it's not all me, or maybe it's me, like, but like I live in such a weird little insular, I'm, you know, sitting alone drawing all day, every day, like, so I get to be neurotic, and I'm like, is it just me? Is it, you know, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I smell bad? Like, what, you know, why, you know? Sorry.
No.
It's the natural deodorant I've been using.
I can't even smell you. It's fine.
Do you have more? Okay. I'm not sure. Do we not? We're missing a statistic. Okay, we can talk through this one. So one of the other ones we don't actually have an image for. We had to, my computer died I ran a project called the Adventure School for Ladies, which was a 2-week comics intensive during which we did nothing but draw comics for 2 weeks and cry about drawing comics and then laugh about drawing comics and then eat food sometimes, not very much. And my computer died during it, and so all of the images were lost. So I apologize for the sudden creation of these images, which Nicole actually threw together today with some delightfully colored pens in no time. But we skipped one, which is about, it presents a little bit more information on the gender and the sex and the race of the creators versus the gender and the sex and the race of the characters that they are creating. And one thing that we discovered, and I'll just say this in broad strokes, is that the world of people making comics is a lot more diverse than the world that they are creating on the page. And this is in terms of race, this is in terms of sexuality, and this is in terms of gender, and it's in terms of economic class. And I've had a couple of conversations recently with creators of color who've actually sort of understood what that was about and said, well, yeah, you know, of course, when you want to create an everyman character, you put a straight white guy in there. Why, you know, of course you do. And there's a part of that that makes sense to me, and there's a part of that that makes my heart die a little bit. And so I wanted to ask the panel how you approach creating characters. And with Mari, it's a little bit of a different situation since you are drawing memoir and autobiography. But I wonder if, since comics sits between being a media form and being an art form, I wonder if you feel that responsibility to put a gendered perspective out into the world, or a raced perspective out into the world, or a perspective on your particular approach to sexuality, which I bet Mari has some great things to say about as well.
I love that I'm in the middle.
I don't know. I guess I had this really interesting. I helped TA for one of Anne's classes earlier, where there was a young man in the class who was making these really amazing comics, but they were populated entirely by white men, some of whom were in love with each other, so that was cool. But and I had a really great conversation with him about how he was scared to make comics about people whose experience he didn't share. And like he was under the impression that he was doing this out of deference, and that like if he didn't have that experience, he didn't have the place to stand to sort of speak to these characters. And we sort of talked about how making that decision to not take those risks, was making a decision and was saying something. It's not a neutral position to take, really. Like, you are editing people out of existence in the world that you're building. And he decided that from here on out, he was going to try and take some risks, and if he got things wrong, to, like, you know, take the constructive criticism and keep trying. And it's, you know, it's kind of weird and awful and difficult to negotiate, but, like, really, really important. And that was a really rewarding conversation to have, and I think a really smart attitude to take. Like, you might not have personal experience with laser guns or space or being a red shirt or whatever, but, like, you write about these things too, and, you know, you can use your imagination and talk to some people and try.
I'm a personifier. Most of my characters aren't very human. Or have genders or names sometimes. And I think that could potentially come out of me not even feeling comfortable rendering humans. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I work sort of in abstractions like that, and it's really important that I do that for me. I think I have a hard time making humans. I don't know.
Yeah, so I write memoir and I'm writing about my life, but this actually does come into play a little bit as I'm newly realizing. So my book that's out is called Kiss and Tell, A Romantic Resume, and it's kind of it's a chronological documentation in comics about all the people that I had crushes on or slept with or made out with from an early age until 22. And part of why I think HarperCollins got interested in it is it's just something that everyone could relate to, which is love, you know, relationships, embarrassing things that happen when you're an adolescent. And I think they're kind of going for, like, the girl market, although strangely that's not my main audience. But so my next book, which I'm currently trying to pitch, where I have an agent who's pitching it, I guess is a little more, it's a little more ethnic. It's actually about me. I mean, I grew up in this very white town, and my mom's Japanese, but I never really thought about it until I hit my 20s and was going into that whole new adult thing, and kind of searching for myself kind of thing. And so in a nutshell, the book's about me getting to know my Japanese side, but and that's why HarperCollins rejected it, because not as many people are gonna identify with it, which is true. Like, I mean, not everyone's gonna, you know, it's an unusual experience. So hopefully I'll find someone, you know, who's a little more open to it. And I mean, I have no bad blood with HarperCollins. I understand what they're saying, and it completely makes sense. They are looking for every woman to publish. But it was kind of a bummer. So yeah, but I don't. I'm very determined not to let that affect what I do and do not talk about. Like, I have a lot of things to say about my bisexuality that are, you know, I'm planning on making some comics about that, and I'm sure that's not going to be, you know, an every woman thing either. Although maybe it will. Ladies.
Enough drinks. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So. I think it's important to stay true to yourself. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really made any fictional people, and I think that would be weird to make a fictional person who is like your protagonist is a white guy who's straight. Like, for me to do that would be really strange, because, I mean, I know I'm married to that guy, but that, you know, I'm not him. I can't really talk from his perspective, but I don't know. Maybe I need to open my mind more. So. Did you have something to say?
I feel kind of like we see stories about those guys all the time, though, right? So even if we haven't experienced it personally, like, we know what that looks like, theoretically, right? I mean, and we're around people like that, too. So it's, you know, it's not a hard thing to sort of sketch out, necessarily. I don't know.
I don't think I could do it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it would ring very true. But, like, I don't know. I've known a lot of white straight guys, and they're all so different, you know?
And, like, why would you want to do that at all?
There's so many squares to explore. Awesome. So our final, potentially most devastating statistic looks at average annual earnings by gender. And what we found is that male comics creators in the same pool of sort of people working in comics, often publishing on the web, publishing in print, self-publishing, working with larger publishers, average annual income for male identified creators was $7,350. Average annual income for female self-publishers was $2,000, and for non-binary gendered creators is $377. And if we look at this in terms of percentages, $7,350 being close to approaching a minimum wage in a couple of the states. As we mentioned, this is a shifting law. $7,350 being 100% of the potential earnings in comics on average every year. $2,000, female creators are earning only 27% of that. If we compare that to other industries, average industries around the US, women earn on average only 77 cents on the dollar in sort of other areas of labor. And so the 27 cents on the dollar is a different ballgame entirely, a different suck ballgame. And non-binary, trans, and genderqueer creators earning $377 a year represents a percentage of 5% of what the potential earnings are in comics every year. And I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind about this is that while we do see the various barriers that come up, so the publishing statistics that we looked at do indicate that there is something gendered about the way that publishers and editors look at work, and there's something gendered about the way that publishers and editors seek out work that is being created. And it does seem to be that male creators attract more attention, but also put out more work for consideration. But I would also, knowing a lot of these people, also say that the problem isn't with any particular individual people, although of course there are individuals who are bigger jerks than others. But the problem itself is more about how we consider comics to exist in the world and what we think that they can be and how we think they should be expressed. And that's why I see this work as fitting into more of a conversation about capitalism and about media and about gender than I do about big jerky dudes who control everything, or patriarchy, or some of those other like white men running the, like whatever crazy problem we can blame that about. These problems are actually not just about men making decisions that are bad for women. These problems are about an entire community of comics creators that's not actually doing what it needs to support everyone who wants to make comics. And one of the reasons that I say that here in Cake is because Cake has tried really, really, really hard to have gender equity in the representation of the comics creators that it has, both as featured guests and as panelists and as table holders. And it's been a really great thing to be a part of. So my final question for the panel before we turn to questions from y'all, if you have any, is more about how you intend to negotiate a career from here on out, maybe being informed by these statistics, maybe being informed by your own experiences thus far.
I don't intend to quit comics anytime soon unless I have a really major existential crisis, which may or may not happen. It seems like every time something comes out, I have like a minor one, so we'll see. But I don't also ever intend it to be my only source of income. But for more reason than just because it can't, because I think, well, for more reasons than the fact that it can't, which is I enjoy having a diversity of things that I do. Like, I'm also a painter, and I also do writing for entertainment purposes. Like, I'm kind of a screenwriter. And that's really rewarding too, and it kind of balances me out. When I do nothing but comics, I go a little crazy sometimes. But it's sad that it's not an option. But
I'm not going to stop making comics. Why is that the question? I don't know.
Are you?
The statistics make me feel like I want to vomit. Yeah. I feel really viscerally affected by them in a really real way. And still teach zines and comics making to a diverse cast of young women, and talk about these issues as much as possible, even in my own communities. And I think LadyDrawers certainly helped me feel really comfortable doing that and developing a language to do that. And I think it's really important not to be a bully about it, and having people in your community seeing you as someone approachable and comfortable with talking about it in a really well-defined way has been a pretty successful way of thinking through the problems that I have to deal with. I'm also really vigilant at telling people to fuck off when they're being jerks. And I get this a lot where people are like, "You're too serious," which, stop it.
Why don't you laugh more? Jesus. Have a sense of humor. No. Yeah. I really just want to keep making things right now, and I have a bunch of student loans to pay and all of that sort of fun bundle. But yeah, just finding as many opportunities as I can and trying to make it work, even though the deck is stacked against, and that's really all you can do, right?
I've worked in a lot of different industries before, and I don't know if this is the case with the comics industry, but I know it's the case in other industries I've been in where, and maybe this is just a widespread thing, where I feel like a lot of the women friends I've had in various jobs have always been kind of afraid to ask what they're worth, and the men haven't. And I think it's so important to always, figure out what you're worth and ask for it. I mean, even now, I get scared trying to negotiate. The other day, I was scared to ask for a payment that was late. And I don't even know why. It's just this weird thing. And I don't feel like a lot of my guy friends get afraid of that. Maybe they do. I don't know. But no one has ever said that to me, whereas women have said that to me a lot, where they're just they feel uncomfortable, asking for payment and stuff. And I don't know, it just makes me wonder if that's part of the overall worldview patriarchy, women getting paid less than men, is just that we're scared to ask for raises sometimes. We're afraid that, I have a very close friend who had to take a pay cut for a while, and everyone was taking pay cuts for a while, but then she was afraid to ask to get her pay back, and, and even though she'd gotten several promotions, she was still making, no money, comparatively speaking, and, it did occur to me, is this because is this a gender thing? Are we taught not to ask for too much? Or is this a California thing? Or I don't know, I don't know what's going on with it, but I think being recently, and actually I kind of want to amend something I said earlier, which is you shouldn't do free work, because you have to when you start out. You have to, if you want anyone to care about your work or acknowledge, you have to get out there first and foremost. But after a certain period of time, if a newspaper, for instance, wants work from you, you always should ask for money, and hopefully more than $100, for a print, in-print thing, or if it's a big New York Times run type newspaper, you always ask for and it drives me crazy lately. I see so many newspapers who are not internet newspapers or whatever, who have contests, design, spend 12 hours designing something for us, and then we'll, if we pick you, then we'll give you $50 and you'll have lots of exposure. It's I'm sorry, when I look at a picture on a magazine, the first thing they're not getting an exposure. Maybe I'll see the picture, but how often do I actually go and look, oh, who made that? And let me go find their website, and I'm just oh, cute picture or whatever. But exposure's nothing. It's not gonna pay your bills, ladies.
I feel a little differently about that. because I think my priorities are they're not different. I think differently about it. I feel like if the system you're given isn't working, fucking make your own. I don't know. Like, that's something I learned being like a deviant youngster, which I still am. But that's sort of what this project is about. It's not fucking working. We're gonna figure out why not and then move on from there with a different approach. I don't know.
It is important to get involved in community and create your own opportunities. I mean, I've like, there are times where the Cartoon Art Museum in San Francisco would have these readings and stuff, and I'd be like, why is no one ever inviting me to these? And I'm like, you know what, fuck it. And so I just went to them and said, hey, I want to organize a reading, and they're totally into it. It's like, oh, I just had to ask. Like, you know, it's very important to, you know, take the reins sometime. I agree.
Yeah, definitely not being shy is probably, I mean, I think that's the first thing I said at the adventure school. Like, if you're not yelling about something, then you're probably not doing it right. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for doing the research here. Are there any numbers on comics readership and demographics?
So the question is, are there any numbers on comics readership and the demographics? And Nicole actually just vociferously nodded her head, and I'm going to let her answer that.
So there's a very lovely woman named Janelle Aslan, who used to edit a lot of Batman books. You might have heard of her. And as part of her master's degree, yes, I think, research, did a really tremendous piece of work about who was reading comics, who was buying comics by gender, and like, did they think marketing was effective? Did they think they were accurately represented in comics? And it's all on the LadyDrawers WordPress. If you want to take a look at those numbers, it's pretty great.
LadyDrawers.wordpress.com. Yes. How old is that research? That research was from last year? Yeah. Yeah. And the way that this works, essentially, Janelle and I work kind of in tandem. She's much more concerned about marketing, and I'm much more concerned about creators' rights and control and intellectual property issues. And so we're each trying to sort of tackle and she also comes from a corporate comics background, and I come from an independent comics background. So we have different ways of formulating these questions. And so each year we are trying to conduct sort of separate surveys or investigations into similar parts of the comics industry and then share them. And she will be writing a book based on essentially why you need to market comics to girls. And I will be writing a book about, like, you know, the international labor industry and how it plays out in comics. In a couple years. Give us some time. Yes? The question is, have you ever felt like you were being talked down to by a male publisher because of your gender? Or patronized? I'll let you guys answer that. I have been.
I have an anecdote I'll share, because LadyDrawers used it recently, and it's like different, because it's not a publisher patronizing me for being a woman. It's like a partner in the comics business talking down to me because I'm a woman. And this is someone very close to me, and I can say it because he just left the room. So someone with a lot of notoriety in the comics community, who I'd been with for a long time, basically was interviewed recently for a book that just came out on a dating website, which is really weird. And why you would say yes to that, I don't know. But it was bad. The question was, has cartooning ever gotten you laid? And I was the answer. And I was the answer not because I'm a creator or I'm a fellow worker, collaborator, editor of book that landed the interview, but because I was beautiful and a fangirl, which is not how we met. We met at an event I organized about comics. It was bad. I blew up. It was cool. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's very easy to forget that you really have to be vigilant for like gender and relational theory to really, yeah, that works, to really matter, and you have to think about it really hard and a lot. Even when you're like telling someone else's story to the point that like you are seeing each other and you're defining somebody else in an interview.
We had a postcard project that we did last year as part of LadyDrawers, where we took some of our statistics and we mailed them to people who should probably know them, and very well-meaningly.
Yeah, I think we should explain that a little bit more, which is that we had spent a semester researching the publishers and then come up with some of the statistics that we've seen here and felt that the publishers should then know what we had come up with. And so we did mail the postcards directly to the publishers and some of the creators as a way of sort of alerting them to the fact that we had come up with this data.
And then they showed up online, which is where it gets interesting. So we had a lot of some very well-meaning people, some of whom were publishers, some of whom were independent publishers, who were telling us the solutions to our problems, not having looked very closely at the numbers. So people who were like, indie comics is the way, you need to leave cape and boots behind, and men and women both making these comments, but in particular a couple of men who ran presses. And the truth that you saw appear a couple minutes ago in our lovely markered charts were that the numbers were worse in independent comics, and that wasn't true. And it gets very frustrating to be told that there is an easy solution to this problem that you keep running into. If it was easy, we would have done it already.
I don't really talk to many publishers, so no, I have not had that opinion. I have a lovely agent who does that for me, running interference, and I'm very grateful for that. I've actually personally, for whatever reason, maybe I'm just blind to it, I haven't encountered a whole lot of sexism in the industry that's blatant. However, a little anecdote, one time my best friend's dad at a party was asking me what I'd been doing, and I just started self-publishing comics. It was like in the late 90s, and I was all excited, and I had my comic there, and he was like, oh. And then my best friend's fiance's friend, who's also in the comics industry now, but this was a long time ago, he just enrolled in comics school, or taking a class on comics, and he piped up and said, oh, I'm taking a class, and suddenly my friend's dad, who I love, but turned to him and said, oh, tell me all about this. And I'm like, but I have comics. And he hadn't made any yet. It was very upsetting. But I'm over it, clearly.
I'll just say that I've spent 15 years in this situation of being talked down to by publishers, but not just men. Is the sort of impetus for the data gathering part of the project is that, again, this isn't exclusive to men in the industry. It's actually opinions that are shared by all comics creators. It's just that the way that it comes out in a male environment is more annoying to me. I think we have time for one more quick question, if anyone has a short question. Maybe the question, how do you fix this? We can totally do that. Nothing? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Mari and Sara and Nicole especially. It was really great having you guys on this panel. And one thing that I will say is that you should most definitely make sure to pick up all of their books over here at the merch table now, as well as read the LadyDrawers column on TruthOut. The new one came out last Tuesday, and the next two will actually be collaborations between Nicole, to my right, and Alex Dom, who is sitting in the middle, who's kind of unofficial LadyDrawers stats monkey for this panel. So thank you all.